started like any ordinary afternoon. Two young women seated across from each other at a small cafe table. From a distance, there was nothing unusual. They laughed occasionally, sipped their drinks, and leaned in close as if sharing secrets. To a passerby, they looked like old friends catching up or college classmates trading gossip. But if anyone had gotten close enough to hear their conversation, they would have quickly realized this was no typical coffee shop chat. The older of the two women, visibly tense, didn't carry the relaxed air of someone simply enjoying a latte. Her face, though still and composed on the surface, revealed a storm of barely contained rage just beneath. Her eyes darted, her voice cracked at times, and she kept nervously smoothing her hair, which was disheveled and clearly unkempt. She wasn't concerned with appearances. She was consumed by something else entirely. And then, in a moment that would seem absurd if it weren't so terrifying, the woman pulled out a baseball bat from under the table. She didn't swing it, but she showed it to the younger woman, as if to say, "This is how we could do it." Her companion, likely startled, leaned in closer as the older woman described in chilling detail how the bat could be used in an attack. But the conversation didn't stop there. Her eyes gleamed with something darker. A twisted form of inspiration. She suddenly suggested an even more disturbing plan. A lethal dose of psychotropic drugs, injected straight into the heart via a syringe. It sounded like something from a horror film, clinical, precise, and cold. The suggestion hung in the air like a poison cloud. The younger woman blinked, her eyes wide. But rather than push away from the table in horror, she nodded, intrigued. She looked up to her older friend, idolized her, and her desperation to earn approval was stronger than her instinct for self-preservation. Besides, there was a cash incentive, $500. For someone in her position, that wasn't a small amount. The plan, outrageous and deranged as it was, wasn't just idle fantasy. It was the seed of something very real and very dangerous. Despite the absurdity of plotting murder over coffee in broad daylight, the consequences would be tragically real. That day, in that cafe, a chain of events began to unravel that would end in the cold-blooded murder of an innocent woman and land 3 people behind bars, their lives permanently destroyed by jealousy, manipulation, and obsession. And all of this, the crime, the twisted motives, and the shocking aftermath, would become one of the most chilling true crime stories in recent memory. Before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. It was 2015, and Kendra Hatcher, a bright, beautiful, deeply compassionate woman, had just turned 35. Born and raised in the close-knit village of Pleasant Plains, Illinois, she grew up steeped in faith and small-town values, never knowing that her path, full of promise and purpose, would ultimately intersect with something so sinister, so tragic, and so completely unthinkable. After high school, many young people from small towns face a critical fork in the road. Some choose to remain close to home, settling into a familiar life of steady jobs, family, and tradition. Others venture out, chasing bigger dreams in faraway cities. Kendra Hatcher belonged firmly to the second group. She wasn't just ambitious. She was driven by a sense of purpose and compassion that would come to define her adult life. Born in Pleasant Plains, Illinois, a quaint village with a population of just around 800, Kendra was raised with strong Christian values. Her upbringing instilled in her not only a moral compass, but also a deep sense of responsibility toward others. From an early age, it was clear that she wasn't like most people. She stood out not just because of her outer beauty, but because of a warmth and genuine care for others that radiated from within. During high school, she was extremely active. She became captain of the cheerleading squad and led the women's volleyball team, showing both athleticism and leadership. But beyond sports, what made Kendra shine was her commitment to service. While other teenagers were navigating typical high school drama, Kendra was leading Bible study groups for underprivileged children and volunteering her time to causes larger than herself. Her giving spirit didn't stop there. Even after she graduated, she continued volunteering globally, traveling on mission trips to help build churches abroad. These experiences left a lasting impact on her and helped shape her future aspirations. She attended DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, where she majored in Spanish and minored in biochemistry, a pairing that showed not just academic talent, but her desire to work across cultures and disciplines. Kendra didn't waste her time during college breaks either. While many of her peers were partying on beaches during spring break, she was out building homes through Habitat for Humanity, an international nonprofit dedicated to providing housing to those in need. After earning her undergraduate degree, Kendra enrolled in dental school at the University of Kentucky, where she hoped to specialize in a field that aligned with her passion for helping others, pediatric dentistry. While in dental school, she fell in love and got married, but like many young couples, they later discovered they were not compatible in the long term. Their split was amicable, and Kendra moved forward with grace, carrying no bitterness. By 2015, Kendra had made her home in Dallas, Texas, where she had built a fulfilling life. She landed a job at a dental practice focused on providing care to children from low-income families, a perfect fit for someone with her heart and values. Kendra wasn't just punching a clock. She was truly making a difference in people's lives every day. Outside of work, Kendra had a vibrant social life. She had built a close-knit group of friends in Dallas. They went to concerts, sporting events, museums, and often met for casual coffee catch-ups. She was well-liked and deeply respected by everyone who knew her. Her friends described her as optimistic, funny, and always the one who lit up the room. She lived in a modern residential complex in downtown Dallas, complete with a pool, gym, and breathtaking views of the city. By all accounts, Kendra had built the life she'd always dreamed of: meaningful work, good friends, and a comfortable home. But there was still one thing missing: love. Despite being financially independent and emotionally grounded, Kendra longed for a deeper connection, a life partner. She wasn't interested in casual flings or surface-level relationships. Having already been through a marriage that didn't work out, Kendra knew what she wanted: someone whose values aligned with hers, someone who shared her commitment to service and family. And though she went on a few dates, nothing ever really clicked. She had high standards, and she wasn't going to compromise them just for the sake of companionship. That is, until she met Ricky Peniagua online in 2015, a meeting that would change the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined. As summer stretched into the fall of 2015, Kendra's life seemed to be on an upward trajectory. She was living in the heart of Dallas, Texas, a bustling city that offered a world of opportunities. Kendra had worked hard to get to where she was, and everything about her life felt fulfilling. She had a rewarding job in pediatric dentistry, helping children from disadvantaged backgrounds get the care they needed. Her work brought her immense joy, and every day she felt like she was making a real difference. Outside of her professional life, Kendra had built a tight-knit group of friends who made her feel like she belonged in the vibrant city. They spent weekends exploring Dallas, going to concerts, attending sports games, visiting museums, or enjoying low-key nights out at local bars. Kendra's friends described her as a ray of sunshine, someone whose laughter was contagious and whose kind nature made everyone feel comfortable and valued. But while she was surrounded by good friends and had a rewarding career, there was still one thing missing: someone to share her life with. Kendra, though financially independent and emotionally strong, longed for a partner. She'd been married once before, but like many young couples, they eventually realized their goals and dreams were no longer aligned. Their separation was amicable, but the scars of that relationship had made Kendra cautious in her search for a new love. She knew exactly what she wanted: someone who would be her equal, a partner with shared values and ambitions, someone who wouldn't just fit into her life but would complement it. It wasn't that Kendra lacked for attention. She had her fair share of suitors, though none of them felt right. She went on a few dates, but in her heart, she knew none of them were truly the one. They didn't spark that deeper connection she was seeking. She wasn't interested in fleeting relationships or temporary flings. She wasn't going to settle. For Kendra, finding someone who genuinely understood her needs and dreams was essential, and she wasn't about to lower her standards just to avoid being alone. It was in 2012, after years of focusing on her career and personal growth, that Kendra decided to dip her toes into the world of online dating. It was a bold move for someone who had always preferred in-person interactions, but as so many others had found, online dating seemed like an easy way to meet new people, especially with such busy lives. As Kendra scrolled through countless profiles on the dating app, she found many men whose interests and values didn't resonate with hers. Some were sincere, but there was always something missing. Either their outlook on life was too different, or their motivations too shallow. It seemed like every profile was a mirror reflecting her own doubts and insecurities about finding someone truly compatible. After a while, she nearly gave up. But then one day, something caught her eye. A profile stood out, that of a man named Ricky Piagua. His bio spoke to Kendra in a way no other profile had. He was a man on a mission, a dermatologist working at a prestigious medical center, and he was also an assistant professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Ricky's ambition and commitment to helping others immediately drew Kendra in. He too was passionate about his work and had a lifestyle that mirrored Kendra's, busy, purposeful, and dedicated to making a difference. As they exchanged messages through the app, they quickly discovered they had much more in common than just their careers. Both were deeply devoted to their work, but also had a love for sports and enjoyed traveling and living life to the fullest. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. They soon moved from messaging on the app to exchanging phone numbers, and it wasn't long before they were making plans to meet in person. The anticipation was high, but both Kendra and Ricky felt an instant connection, the kind that only comes once in a lifetime. The first date was set for May 24, 2015. When the day arrived, Kendra was both nervous and excited, hoping for the connection she had felt online to translate into real life. As soon as they met, it became clear that this was something special. Ricky was everything she had hoped for and more: kind, intelligent, and grounded. Kendra immediately realized that Ricky was unlike any other man she had ever met. He was genuine, attentive, and saw her as a true partner, someone with whom he could build a future. For Ricky, the feelings were mutual. He had been in relationships before, but this felt different. He saw Kendra as someone he could truly see himself with, not just for the short term, but for the long haul. Her kindness, her ambition, and the way she radiated positivity were qualities Ricky had been looking for. By the end of their first date, it was clear that both of them had found something rare. Over the next few months, their relationship progressed quickly. It was as if they had been destined to meet. They began spending every available moment together, arranging unique dates, weekend getaways, and shared adventures. Plans for the future were discussed early on: marriage, children, and a life built together. But while everything seemed perfect, life had a way of throwing curveballs. As the holiday season approached, Ricky and Kendra made plans to visit Kendra's family in Illinois, a trip that would solidify their bond. Kendra couldn't wait to introduce Ricky to her loved ones, who had already heard so much about him. They were eager to meet the man who had captured her heart. It was a sign that this was getting serious. But what no one, not even Kendra, could have anticipated was the devastating tragedy that would soon shatter her life and the lives of everyone who loved her. On the evening of September 2, 2015, everything seemed ordinary. Kendra had finished her day at the dental clinic, where she'd spent hours providing care and comfort to children in need. It was just another Wednesday, and she had plans to relax after work, perhaps unwind with a quiet evening at home. As she drove into the underground parking garage of her residential complex in Dallas, everything felt calm. But what Kendra didn't know was that the night would end in a horrific tragedy. A tragedy that would leave her friends and family heartbroken and searching for answers. At precisely 7:42 p.m., Kendra parked her car and prepared to head upstairs to her apartment. The day had been a good one, filled with work that gave her a sense of purpose, but little did she know, it would be her last. As she gathered her belongings, a deafening scream echoed through the parking garage, followed by several gunshots. Nearby, another resident, a young man named Hashim, had just parked his car when he heard the sounds of gunfire. At first, he wasn't sure what was happening, but the chilling sound of someone screaming and then multiple shots made his heart race. He immediately got back into his car and began driving through the garage, desperately scanning the area for the source of the disturbance. He was almost at the exit when he spotted a woman lying near one of the cars. It was Kendra. Her body was sprawled on the cold concrete floor of the garage, and it was clear from the position of her body that something was terribly wrong. She had been shot. Hashim quickly dialed 911, reporting the shooting and the woman he had just found. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but tragically, it was already too late. Kendra, a 35-year-old pediatric dentist with a heart of gold, was gone. She had been executed in cold blood. The police arrived on the scene and immediately cordoned off the garage, turning it into a crime scene. Investigators began combing through the area, collecting bullet fragments, a gun magazine, and other pieces of evidence. Kendra's cell phone was found lying near her body, but what was missing was her purse. A sense of unease began to settle in among the detectives as they examined the scene further. This wasn't just a random act of violence or a botched robbery as initially suspected. This was something much darker, much more personal. The initial assumption had been that this was a robbery gone wrong. After all, Kendra had been working in a well-off neighborhood, and her apartment complex catered to residents with comfortable incomes. It made sense at first that the killer might have been after her possessions, especially if her purse was missing. However, as the detectives began to examine the evidence more closely, they began to doubt their original theory. Kendra Hatcher's execution style. The gunshots had struck her in the back and the upper part of her head. The bullet had exited through her chin. It was clear from the way the shots had been fired that the victim had no chance to defend herself. The wounds suggested she had been standing or kneeling at the time, and most tellingly, there was evidence of gunpowder residue on her hands, which suggested that she had raised her arms and held them behind her head in a final, instinctive gesture of surrender before the shots were fired. This wasn't the work of a random criminal. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a personal attack, a cold and calculated act of violence that pointed to someone with a deep motive. As the police began to investigate further, they found that Kendra had no enemies. She was beloved by everyone who knew her. She was a dedicated professional, a kind friend, and someone who devoted her time to children in need. It seemed impossible that anyone would want to hurt her, let alone take her life. The shock of her death spread like wildfire through the community. People who knew Kendra were devastated, unable to comprehend why anyone would target such a kind, selfless person. Meanwhile, the surveillance cameras in the garage provided some valuable clues. The footage showed a black Jeep Cherokee entering the garage at 7:15 p.m., about 30 minutes before Kendra returned to her car. This meant the shooter was waiting for a specific victim. The footage clearly showed the Jeep speeding out of the garage after the shots were fired, and the camera also revealed that someone else was in the car with the shooter. A woman. The police were now certain that this wasn't the work of a single person, but rather a coordinated effort. One person had been behind the wheel, and the other had carried out the murder. However, the quality of the surveillance footage was poor, making it impossible to identify the people in the car with certainty. The police made a public appeal, asking anyone who might recognize the vehicle or its passengers to come forward. The media, of course, picked up the story quickly. The sensational nature of the crime, a successful female dentist gunned down in cold blood, made headlines across the country. The public was riveted by the mystery surrounding the crime. But as the case unfolded, new details began to emerge that would shock everyone involved. The very next day, a tip came in that would change the course of the investigation. A man named Jose Ortiz called the police. He was nervous, and the sound of anxiety was clear in his voice. The Jeep, he explained, belonged to him. He had loaned it to a friend, but he assured the dispatcher he had no idea it was involved in such a horrific crime. His phone call was pivotal. It put the investigation on a new path. Jose explained that he had lent his car to a woman named Brenda Delgado. He didn't know the full details of what had happened, but when he saw the footage of the Jeep on the news, he was alarmed. What happened next, however, would further unravel the mystery of Kendra's murder, leading detectives down a dark and twisted path involving betrayal, jealousy, and a deadly obsession. Brenda Delgado's life had always been a mixture of ambition and frustration. She was born and raised in central Mexico, in a family that, like many immigrant families, worked hard to survive and provide for their children. Her father worked in construction, and her mother cleaned houses for others, struggling to make ends meet. Brenda's dreams were much bigger than the life she saw her parents living. She wanted more, a life that wasn't defined by poverty or hard physical labor. But those dreams didn't come easily. In her early teenage years, Brenda set her sights on something better. She decided to pursue a career in dentistry, a field that seemed to promise financial stability and respect. But, like many young people, Brenda's ambitions were hindered by the realities of her circumstances. Her family couldn't afford to pay for her college education. So, during breaks between classes, Brenda worked tirelessly, juggling 2 jobs, one as a dental assistant and another at a spa where she offered teeth whitening services. This grueling work paid the bills and allowed her to buy the textbooks and materials needed for her education. Brenda's determination seemed to be paying off. By the time she enrolled in dental hygiene school, she had earned a sense of pride in her accomplishments, despite the obstacles she had overcome. Her success was a testament to her hard work and resilience, but deep down, there was still a part of her that longed for more. More than what her parents had. More than what she had. Her path seemed clear, and in some ways, her life was on track. But like many young people, Brenda faced unexpected emotional hurdles that would shape her future in ways she never could have anticipated. In 2012, Brenda met Ricky Piagua online, a man she would come to see as both a lifeline and, ultimately, her greatest source of obsession. Ricky's profile on the dating app stood out to Brenda. He was ambitious and successful, a man who had built his life from the ground up. Ricky was a dermatologist and an assistant professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, a profession that spoke to Brenda's desire for something prestigious. He was also athletic and passionate about life, someone who seemed to embody all the qualities Brenda wanted in a partner. Brenda and Ricky's relationship moved quickly. Within 3 months, Brenda had moved into Ricky's luxurious apartment in Dallas. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was living the life she had always dreamed of. The lavish apartment, the beautiful city, the successful boyfriend, everything seemed perfect. But as is often the case with fast-moving relationships, things quickly began to unravel. In June of 2013, Brenda found out she was pregnant. The news was unexpected, and after much discussion, both she and Ricky agreed to terminate the pregnancy. The decision, though mutual, took an emotional toll on Brenda. She had kept the pregnancy a secret from her family and friends, so she had no one to confide in about her feelings. To cope, she wrote motivational notes on her phone, trying to convince herself that she and Ricky would have children in the future, that things would get better. But despite her best efforts to push the sadness aside, Brenda struggled to move on. Her emotions were further complicated when, later that year, Ricky proposed they take a break from their relationship. The breakup came out of nowhere for Brenda, and she was devastated. She had invested so much into Ricky and their life together, and now it seemed like all of that was falling apart. To her, it was a blow to her self-worth, and it shattered the vision she had for the future. In the months that followed, Brenda was inconsolable. She dropped out of dental hygiene school, stopped caring about her grades, and spiraled into a deep, emotional pit. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of winning Ricky back, as she believed he was the key to the life she had always wanted. Desperate to reclaim the relationship, Brenda used every method she could think of to get his attention. But nothing seemed to work. However, Brenda was nothing if not determined, and she refused to let go of Ricky. Over the next few months, she managed to restore her relationship with him. Though they lived apart, they began to speak regularly, and Ricky even started to pay for some of Brenda's monthly expenses. Despite the distance, the emotional bond between them appeared to have been reignited. They began discussing their future together once again, and Brenda started to believe that perhaps they would eventually get married. But just when Brenda thought things were looking up, February 2015 brought another devastating blow. Ricky broke up with her again. This time, he told her that while he still cared about her, he wanted to remain just friends. To Brenda, this was not just a breakup. It was a final rejection, one that she couldn't accept. Ricky's decision to move on hit Brenda like a tidal wave. He had made it clear that he was serious about his relationship with Kendra Hatcher, the woman he had met and begun dating in the spring of 2015. Brenda's jealousy, which had been simmering for months, boiled over. Ricky had even mentioned to her that he had met the girl of his dreams and that he was planning to move to California with Kendra. This was the breaking point for Brenda. Her obsession with Ricky turned into an uncontrollable rage. She couldn't bear the thought of him being with another woman, especially someone she didn't know. Her insecurities, fears, and jealousy all merged into a singular, toxic desire. She had to get him back at any cost. Brenda wasn't just heartbroken, she was consumed by a dark, obsessive rage. She began tracking Ricky's every move, keeping tabs on him through his emails and phone apps. She used software to monitor his location, showing up unannounced at places he visited, hoping to catch him off guard. She also began obsessively checking Kendra Hatcher's social media profiles. What started as simple jealousy soon grew into something much more sinister. Kendra's happiness became Brenda's greatest source of pain, and Brenda's mind began to spiral further. The idea of Kendra and Ricky building a life together sent Brenda into a fury, and she started plotting her next move. At first, she just wanted to scare Kendra, to somehow destroy her happiness. But soon, the anger deep inside her festered into something far darker. She wanted Kendra gone, out of the picture for good. Brenda's obsession with Ricky, coupled with her need to regain control over her life, led her to recruit Crystal Cortez, a young woman who was struggling financially and emotionally. Crystal became a key player in Brenda's twisted plan to eliminate Kendra from the equation once and for all. Brenda's motives had now morphed into something much more dangerous than mere jealousy. She was no longer trying to win Ricky back. She was bent on destroying the woman who stood in her way. A woman who, to Brenda, represented everything she felt she could never have. And that was when the plot to murder Kendra Hatcher truly began. Brenda's desperation to eliminate Kendra only grew as her obsession with Ricky reached a boiling point. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was consumed by the idea that Kendra's happiness with Ricky was a threat to everything she had worked for. Brenda had crossed a dangerous line. She was no longer thinking rationally, and soon her plan turned from a fantasy into a dark, real-life mission. Brenda knew that Crystal Cortez, a 23-year-old single mother, was struggling financially and emotionally. Crystal had her own troubles, living with her son at her grandparents' house, and was eager for any opportunity that promised financial relief. When Brenda approached her with an offer of $500 to drive a car during a robbery, Crystal didn't hesitate. The sum seemed like a small fortune to someone in her position, and the prospect of getting Brenda's approval made the offer even more tempting. Brenda had become an idol to Crystal, someone she admired and wished to emulate. But what Crystal didn't know was that Brenda wasn't just asking her to drive a car. She was asking her to be part of a cold-blooded plan to murder Kendra Hatcher. Brenda had already scouted Kendra's apartment complex and planned the attack for when Kendra would be most vulnerable. The decision was made: shoot Kendra, a method that seemed simple but was anything but. However, neither Brenda nor Crystal had any experience with firearms, and both knew that carrying out the murder would require someone with more expertise. Brenda quickly found a willing accomplice, Christopher Love, a man with a criminal history. Love was no stranger to shady dealings. He had spent much of his life involved in petty crimes, and selling drugs was his primary source of income. Brenda approached him with an offer: $3,000 worth of weed and a cash payment in exchange for killing Kendra. Christopher agreed, and a contract was made. Brenda and Crystal's role in the plot was set. Crystal would drive the car, a Jeep Cherokee, while Christopher Love would carry out the shooting. The night of the murder, the plan went into motion. Brenda was initially set to use a silver BMW for the crime, but when that car wouldn't start, Jose Ortiz, a man Brenda knew, lent her his Jeep Cherokee without knowing its intended use. Meanwhile, Brenda and Crystal went to a local restaurant to establish an alibi, while Christopher Love and Crystal set the wheels in motion. As the night unfolded, Kendra had no idea that her life was in danger. She was simply finishing her shift at work, headed home, completely unaware that two people were waiting to take it all from her. In the parking garage, as Kendra parked her car and gathered her things, Christopher Love approached her and shot her execution style, just as Brenda had planned. After the shooting, Crystal drove the getaway car while Christopher disappeared into the darkness. But their actions didn't go unnoticed. Crystal's involvement in the crime was quickly discovered. She confessed her role in the murder, giving the police the crucial information they needed to start putting the pieces together. The investigation moved quickly, but despite Brenda being the mastermind behind the murder, the evidence against her wasn't immediately conclusive. However, detectives were relentless. The surveillance footage from the garage, Crystal's confession, and other gathered evidence eventually led to the arrest of Christopher Love. Brenda, fearing that the police were closing in on her, fled the country. She went into hiding, eventually making her way to Mexico, where she was able to live under the radar for months. Despite Brenda's efforts to escape justice, the law was hot on her trail. After the murder of Kendra Hatcher, the investigation began to intensify, and Crystal Cortez was soon arrested. When the police detained her, Crystal initially denied her involvement, but eventually admitted her role in the plot. She confessed to driving the getaway car, explaining how she had been manipulated by Brenda, who had promised her $500 for her part in the crime. Crystal's involvement had been driven by financial desperation, but she quickly realized the true horror of what she had helped orchestrate. As Crystal cooperated with the investigation, giving the authorities the details they needed, they were able to piece together the full story. Christopher Love, the man who had pulled the trigger, was also arrested. His criminal history made him a prime suspect, and the police were able to link him to the crime with crucial evidence, including DNA found in the Jeep Cherokee and the murder weapon. Though Love initially denied knowing anything about the victim or the crime, his story quickly fell apart as more evidence surfaced. Meanwhile, Brenda Delgado, the mastermind behind the murder, had fled the United States. Fearing arrest, she crossed the border into Mexico, where she lived in hiding for several months. The FBI put her on its most wanted list, offering a $100,000 reward for any information leading to her capture. But despite the intense manhunt, Brenda seemed to vanish, her trail going cold. Months later, in April 2016, Brenda was tracked down in Torreon, Mexico. The Mexican authorities, with help from the FBI, located her after months of investigation. However, Mexican law prevented her extradition unless the U.S. promised not to pursue the death penalty. This legal complication delayed the process, but Brenda was eventually brought back to the U.S. to face trial. In exchange for her cooperation, Crystal Cortez struck a deal with the authorities. She pleaded guilty to her role in the murder and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. The young mother, faced with the prospect of her son growing up without her, decided to cooperate fully in the case against Brenda and Christopher. Christopher Love's trial began in October 2018. The prosecution's case was straightforward, with Crystal's testimony and the physical evidence sealing his fate. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before finding him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, a punishment that Kendra's family felt was just. Love's defense team tried to appeal, claiming racial bias in the jury, but their efforts were in vain. Brenda's trial began in June 2019. By this time, the public was fully aware of the shocking details of her obsession with Ricky and the role she had played in planning Kendra's murder. Ricky Paniagua, Kendra's boyfriend, was one of the key witnesses, describing the extent of Brenda's jealousy and how she had manipulated people around her. In the end, Brenda was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kendra Hatcher's tragic death had left a hole in the hearts of those who loved her, but in the end, justice was served. Brenda's jealousy and rage had not only cost Kendra her life, but also condemned Brenda to spend the rest of her life behind bars. A stark reminder of how obsession can destroy everything in its path.